So good evening, welcome everyone. This is a wonderful event that we have every year. I'm David Madigan. I'm the Executive Vice President and Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, and I'm very glad to have the opportunity to welcome you. Tonight we are celebrating a group of extremely distinguished faculty, and it never ceases to amaze me just how extraordinary our faculty are. And I've been involved in this process. This is the 6th year that I've been involved with it. The nominations that we receive are truly spectacular, and the faculty who are amongst us this evening are truly spectacular. So it's a very happy, wonderful occasion. So I'm very happy to welcome you on behalf of the university and on behalf of President Bollinger. We're here to celebrate exceptional teaching and scholarship, which can be truly transformative, both for the individual students and for the entire university. And what we do here is we have extraordinary potential to do good in the world, both through our scholarship and through our teaching, vicariously through our students who then go out into the world and do wonderful things. Later in the evening, we'll hear firsthand from students about the impact of these extraordinary faculty that we're celebrating. But first and briefly, I just want to take a moment to talk about Jerry and Marguerite Lenz, who unfortunately can't be here tonight. When the Lenz established these awards in 2005, they knew that there were great scholars at Columbia who were also great teachers and mentors. The Lenz have been extraordinarily generous to Columbia. They've supported programs both in the arts and sciences and in the arts and in the law school, and also they supported a matching program for endowed chairs that was extraordinarily generous. So they matched dollar for dollar donations to endowed chairs, but without having their name on the chair. So there are now, it's around about 20 chairs, endowed chairs in the arts and sciences, that the Lenz supported, but you wouldn't know, right? Their name is not explicitly attached to it, and their dedication to this university is quite extraordinary. As one of my duties and great pleasures is to call the awardees and notify them of their excitement. And I've done this. This is the 6th year in a row that I've done this, and it's pretty amazing. So I've gotten all kinds of reactions, varying from people screaming, which happened one year, to people crying. This year, there's one amongst you, and I won't name you. It's okay. So I called. It was essentially a cold call. So usually people are notified in advance. Would you be available at such and such a time, if I were to call? But in this particular occasion, it was a cold call. So I called somebody here, and so they picked up the phone, and there was silence. And normally somebody would say hello, but it was silence. So they clearly thought this was a commercial call of some spam of some sort. So I, after the silence for maybe 2 or 3 seconds, and I said, hello, this is David Madigan. Click. The phone went dead. So their initial reaction clearly was that this was not a call they wanted to take. And then 5 seconds later, my phone was calling from my cell phone. 5 seconds later, my phone rang, and it was, is that David Madigan from Columbia University? So they were a little bit embarrassed, but it all worked out. What's supposed to happen next is that I introduce Jim Valentini, who's the Dean of Columbia College, my friend and colleague. Jim has done a number on his knee. And has been, some of you have seen him in the last few days, he's been limping around. So he is not with us tonight. He was in considerable pain towards the end of the day today. So I am going to attempt to take his place. Each of the awardees, there are 8, the way we do this is we ask students of the awardees to present the awardee. And so that's what we'll do. And we'll do it in groups, I think it's of 2 and 3 between courses of the dinner. So we are going to, actually before I do that, we have a number of past winners we're doing this since 2005, so there are quite a few past winners of this wonderful award. I'd ask the previous winners of this award to stand, please, at this time. Okay, so let's, we'll at this point introduce some of the students. So Sorry, I'm trying to pretend to be Jim here. The first student that will introduce Courtney Bender is Angela Xia, who is here somewhere. There you are. Very good. Angela comes from Cincinnati, Ohio. Her area of study is American Studies, and Angela is a Columbia College student, class of 2018. So please come to the podium.
Good evening. Upon hearing that Professor Bender had won this award, I did two things. I danced a victory jig, which for your sake I will not reproduce here, and I volunteered to give this speech. This will be easy, I thought to myself. Our story is a classic one. I met Professor Bender my sophomore year, took two fascinating courses with her on the history and sociology of American religion, and was so inspired by the material and by Professor Bender herself, I decided to make the study of religion my life's work too. Voila! Fade to black, roll the credits, get mom over there a handkerchief. Yet, when I sat down to write this, I realized it was not going to be easy, not because I lacked anecdotes or lessons to share, but because our story is more than the sum of its parts. Professor Bender introduced me to the academic study of religion, true, but she also encouraged me to participate in it, convinced that somewhere in my jumbled thoughts were interesting and cogent research questions waiting to be developed. In class, she encouraged me to cut the tangents, cut the self-doubt, and in the name of intellectual courage, get to my point. I recall my first midterm paper on which she had written, "Angie, this tells me why Durkheim identified religion and community as powerful social forces, but I'm surprised you did not answer the real question. What do you think is compelling about him?" This threw me into a panic. What did I think? Did I have thoughts? It turned out that I did have thoughts, and Professor Bender did her utmost in class, in office hours, in the pages and pages of comments she wrote on my weekly papers to encourage these. Though big picture questions like, what is religion? What is the secular? What is the spiritual? Remain at the fore of my research and writing, I've learned from Professor Bender to get granular, to ask, what does it mean, for example, to live as a charismatic Christian woman who, from our readings, by gathering with her peers to discuss marriage and spiritual warfare, remakes the practice of wifely submission? What does it mean, as another example, to live as a Massachusetts local whose out-of-body experiences tune him into a time and space beyond our own? What does it mean, in other words, to live in a body that gets up each day and makes the concept of religion concrete? A necessary part of understanding the concrete experience of religion is doing field work. A year ago, I joined the New Sanctuary Coalition of New York City, a network of congregations and individuals organizing against the deportation of undocumented New Yorkers. I wanted to understand their work on their terms. The group quickly accepted me as one of their own, which both thrilled and frightened me. What were the moral and social consequences of studying a community I belonged to myself? As I had time and again, I turned to Professor Bender. Sitting down in her office on a sunny June day, and yes, she met with me in the summer, I explained my concern. For the past few weeks, a sociologist and then a journalist had been sitting in on our Thursday community meetings, taking notes as everyone shared their worries for the week. At our last meeting, the sociologist and journalist were asked to stop taking, be it notes, names, or stories, and to start giving. It was a tense moment, and it made me worry. Did my New Sanctuary friends think of me this way? Professor Bender assured me that they did not. I was not a documentary photographer or a fly on the wall, but an active part of the group. Just as New Sanctuary members bear witness to immigration proceedings, packing ICE courtrooms with their silent but active support, Professor Bender encouraged me to witness New Sanctuary. In guiding me through this situation, and many, many more, Professor Bender paired perceptive critique with the sincere and utter belief in me, urging me to be my very best. With her help, that best self has emerged. I even matched the tablecloths, and is honored to present Courtney Bender with the Distinguished Columbia Faculty Award. Thank you. Okay.
Did we practice this?
Okay.
Thank you very much. I forgot the key instruction, which is please eat. So our second awardee this evening is Eleanor Johnson. And to introduce Eleanor, Lindsay Sanderson, Columbia College class of 18, will do the honors. Lindsay is from San Diego, California, majoring in English with a concentration in computer science. Lindsay, here she comes.
I came to Columbia certain that I would major in science. I wasn't sure exactly which discipline, but as my periodic table pillow and poster could attest, I was destined to spend my days at the university in labs and large lecture halls. But I thought I'd take one English class for fun, and then another, and then found myself sitting in Professor Eleanor Johnson's class on the Canterbury Tales. The work is entirely in Middle English, and as Professor Johnson mentioned one class, people usually get that right on the third try, after first assuming it's the Old English of Beowulf or the early modern English of Shakespeare. Middle English, for me, is a perfect middle ground between the two. Close enough to what we see and hear today that you can tell it's the same language, but with unusual enough syntax and spelling to keep things exciting. Since taking Professor Johnson's class, I have suggested reading the entirety of the Canterbury Tales in Middle English to all of my close friends and family. Astonishingly, no one has taken me up on the proposal. Chaucer's writing is difficult, unlike anything I'd read before, and also wonderfully lowbrow in all the best ways. Many people have heard the famous first line, Juan that April with his shur sota, but dissecting exactly what those words mean is another story entirely. When I took a second class with Professor Johnson, called Visionary Dramas and Dramatic Visions, I worried that I may have lucked out the first time around. Maybe most medieval writing is actually dry, dense, and hard to relate to. But once again, over 500 years after the texts were written, Professor Johnson illuminated our reading, pointing out the humor in deeply theological works and glossing the archaic juridical language littered throughout popular plays. Now in my junior year, I've morphed from an aspiring scientist into an aspiring medievalist for a lot of reasons, but my experience as Professor Johnson's student sits at the top of the list. I remember explaining to her in office hours that I was actually a physics major, but there was something about Chaucer that made the tales hard to put down. As it turns out, Professor Johnson also started out interested in physics in college, but English likewise lured her away. She talked both then and in lecture about a particular professor who shaped her undergraduate experience, and I remember laughing to myself, thinking about how many students in her class, myself included, thought of her as that central teacher during their time at Columbia. I knew Professor Johnson would be my favorite teacher at the university since the first day of class, or rather, after I missed the first day of class. I wrote what I now realize was probably an excessively apologetic email and found myself walking with her from her office to our second day of class, the only time she could meet. While many teachers would have been reluctant to discuss literature while climbing the stairs to Hamilton 7, Professor Johnson managed to summarize an hour-long introduction to the Canterbury Tales while making the strenuous 5-flight journey. In class, it is rare when someone asks a question and she doesn't have an answer, and usually a nuanced and multifaceted one. I am not at all a history person, but I can now tell you a surprising amount about the Peasants' Uprising of 1381 after it wove its way into many of Professor Johnson's expert responses. But she isn't just the brightest teacher I've had at Columbia. She's also the most human. Since my first day in her classroom, Professor Johnson has constantly reminded me that there are faculty members who truly care about their students and will not only go out of their way to explain the material, but also demonstrate why you should care about it as fervently as they do. I don't think I've ever met someone more passionate about what they study, but more importantly, I don't think I've ever met someone more passionate about teaching. Because of Professor Johnson, I lugged 4 distinct copies of Piers Plowman around for the month of December. Because of her, I employ better verbs when I write papers, and I bring up the Merchant's Tale in conversation. Since taking her class, I've heard many, many people tell me to please talk about anything other than the Middle English stuff. And because of Professor Johnson, I will graduate from Columbia with a major in English. Nearing the end of my time here, I can think of no one who deserves this award more, and I can't wait to sit in one of Professor Johnson's lectures again next year. Congratulations.
I was told I could make comments, and no one should ever tell me that unless they're really serious, because I love to comment as a medievalist. So I just wanted to say quickly that all of my students at Columbia, particularly my undergraduate students, have utterly shaped my life, my scholarship, my career, and even my personal life. I have a small child in the back, and it was my last lecture class that was my support crew as I went through my brutal pregnancy. And my first book and my second book both emerged in large part out of really good questions that I got from my really talented undergraduate students in lecture. So thank you, Lenz, for making this possible. And even more than that, thank you to all my students, in particular to Sheena and Sasha and Lindsay for being here with me tonight. I appreciate you all very much, and seeing strong, brilliant young women in the audience is more moving to me than I can say. So thank you so much.
As you know, this is an award that recognizes teaching and research and mentorship. And there is perhaps no more extended and longer-lasting mentorship than the mentorship that our faculty gives to their graduate students while they're here and as they become academics of their own in the future. So as Dean of the Graduate School, I wanted simply to recognize the work that you do day in, day out, year out, and how often that work never really stops. So my intervention tonight is really to introduce two students who will speak about their experiences with two of the awardees tonight. The first is Alicia Schleifman, 18, Columbia College, and she hails from New York City. And she's a major in art history, and she will speak on behalf of Professor Brandon Joseph.
It would be easy to simply list Professor Joseph's professional and scholarly accomplishments in the field of art history for the entirety of the time allotted for this speech. Those of you who know him know there's no shortage of either. But to better illuminate his skill as a gifted teacher and a guiding mentor, I thought I should share my own experience with Professor Joseph this year instead. Last spring, I knew I wanted to pursue a senior thesis project on Ed Ruscha, a contemporary artist based in Los Angeles whose images of floating words had always fascinated me. With that vaguely defined goal in mind, I asked Professor Joseph to be my advisor. I'd enjoyed his contemporary art class that semester and felt challenged by his teaching both in and outside seminar. While I worked on my final paper, he continually advised me to think about what made my topic significant within the sphere of contemporary art, which guided my thinking. After I turned it in, he gave me thoughtful comments on how I might approach my discussion of the artist I had chosen in the future. I wasn't sure what to expect from the thesis writing process or what my advisor's role would be, but I can say now that without his guidance, advice, and support, my project would not have been a fraction of what it became. Months before the thesis application was even due, Professor Joseph sat down with me for 2 hours on a sunny day in late May after school ended to discuss research methods for the project and give me advice. It was an informal meeting in a coffee shop off campus, no laptops or books, just conversation. But the suggestions he outlined proved to be invaluable for how I read sources in preparation for writing. When I later devised and grew fond of a preliminary topic that centered too much on Ruscha's biography, Professor Joseph challenged my approach, talking through my own interests to help me come up with a more rigorous and promising inquiry. He suggested I look instead to literature on pop art to find questions asked of artists like Andy Warhol and apply them in turn to Ruscha. I started here and wound up looking to early modernism in Europe, but using the approach Professor Joseph suggested. Even before I made an outline, he worked with me extensively to ensure that I would begin the project in a sustainable way. He never told me what to do, but gave me the ability to figure it out on my own. One might say that instead of giving me food, he taught me how to fish. As I began the impossible task of actually writing, Professor Joseph read everything I produced with an eye for detail I barely have for my own work. When I sent him a draft of 3 chapters, I didn't expect line comments, but that's what I received down to the very last section, in addition to thoughtful structural notes that shaped my revisions. What makes Professor Joseph an outstanding teacher is the fact that you know your work has his full attention. It goes without saying that he's exceptionally busy. As well as advising other graduate and undergraduate students in art history, he moonlights as a book editor and a consulting curator, for example. Even still, Professor Joseph has always made me feel as if guiding me through my thesis was as important to him as any of his other projects. More importantly, Professor Joseph's continued advice and input have made me a far better writer, editor, and student. This sort of mentorship is the large part of the appeal of undertaking a project as intensive as a thesis, and what's attractive about studying at a school like Columbia College. I'm immensely grateful to have encountered a professor as invested in his students' success and work as Professor Joseph has been in mine. I consider myself exceptionally lucky to have had you as a mentor, and congratulations on receiving a Distinguished Faculty Award.
I'm just going to say a few things. I've been told by several people to keep it short, although it's like the Academy Awards, so you can't stop me, I guess. But one, I'm very unphotogenic, so that's not going to work, like she's looking. Two, I want to thank the Lenfests for doing this. It's very important to, or it's very exceptional, I think, to reward teaching. In this sense, so I wanted to say that. And I want to thank my chair for my department, who's allowed me to, given me the resources to do things like bring in guest speakers into classes and try to do the kind of fun things that I want to do to make classes seem interesting. And I want to thank the students who have indulged me in certain assignments or courses like a class on UFO photographs or an assignment like try to write like a rock star or something like that, so which Alicia has had to do. And so keeping it short, that's it. Thanks.
I'd like to introduce to you Yuki Haba, whose hometown is Tokyo, Japan. Yuki received an MA in Ecology, Evolution, and Conservation Biology in 2017 from the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences, with a thesis on genomics of adaptation in an insect, an Asian-bearing beetle, Necrophorus nepalensis. He will speak on behalf of Professor Molly Piewarski.
Good evening. As an undergraduate in Japan, I studied ecology, often going out to forests, rivers, oceans to examine wildlife. The evolution and diversity fascinated me. But without quantitative approach, correlational and observational studies in ecology and evolution left me wanting. I longed to bridge a gap between molecular biology and organismal biology. In 2015, I started a master's program in ecology and evolution at Columbia, where my main advisor, Dustin Rubenstein, an integrative biologist and himself a distinguished Columbia faculty hour sitting there, our D. Yes, I'm extremely lucky. Recommended a class that would change my view of evolution and ultimately my career path. This course was Evolution in the Age of Genomics, taught by Professor Molly Piewarski. The class was totally mind-blowing. Molly and co-instructor Guy Sella introduced how genomic data could address the age-old evolutionary questions like how did humans evolve? Why are some short, some tall? How do animals adapt to environment? In a distinctly quantitative way. I almost immediately changed my focus to evolutionary genetics. Although it was an undergraduate course, I felt challenged by the quantitative nature of population genetics, and also by the fact that that was my first year and first semester as an international student. Molly, however, explained the difficult concept of population genetics, like linkage, disequilibrium, I don't know how to pronounce it, but, or the coalescent theory, in a really, really distinctly nice way. I remember I would sit at the front of the class, record all the lectures, and listen to them again and again while I'm, commuting, working out to distill all the essential details from the class. Thus, Molly's class strengthened not only my scientific ability, but also improved my ability to speak in public in English about science. By the end of my master's program, I had taken 3 classes within 2 years with Molly, each one engaging and unique. In the latter 2 discussion-based graduate level classes, we would critically evaluate or examine the contemporary literature in the evolutionary genomics. It was again eye-opening how she would sometimes challenge the prestige of premises of high-profile journals, telling me that we should value the quality of science over the perceived prestige of journals. More importantly, though, in classes, I've learned that there are a lot of exciting open questions in evolutionary genetics. One of which was the extent to which genetic variation influences animals and humans' behavior, which would eventually become my focus of my PhD thesis. Beyond the classroom, Molly later welcomed me to her evolutionary genetics lab, where I joined a project on the evolution of recombination gene, PRDM9, across vertebrates. In the lab, Molly taught me all about PopGen, but also about how to do science. By this I mean not only how to rigorously address questions and to analyze and interpret the data, but also how to approach difficult process of writing, revising, and publishing the paper. Last year, we actually published a paper in eLife, which was my very first scientific publication. Yes. Moreover, as one of the committee members for my master's thesis, Molly helped push my work to the level that I dreamed of when I came to Columbia, combining ecological questions with quantitative analysis. Thanks to Molly and Dustin, I ended up being awarded the best master's thesis in the department last year. And now I am pursuing a PhD degree at Princeton. The blood of Szyborski love continues to run deep in my veins. What I really want to communicate, though, is that my experience in Molly's lab is not unique to me. I know from working with other colleagues in the lab how much they have also been shaped by working with Molly, not only in scientific or intellectual way, but also how they teach others and mentor others. We all thank you, Molly, and congratulate you on this award.
Hi, I'm going to use a minute as well, and it'll only be a minute. which is to say that science is more collaborative than it sometimes seems and more communal than it sometimes seems. So I want to take the opportunity to thank the people in my lab, because I've learned at least as much from them as I've had a chance to impart. And 4 of them are here tonight, so I'll single them out. Yuki, obviously, who came from Princeton, Molly Schumer, who came from Boston, and then 2 current members of my lab, Ipsita Agarwal and Hahamanesh Mustafavi, and then just past and present other members of my lab who aren't here today, because I'm grateful for the opportunity to work with them. So thank you.
Good evening. I'm Lisa Rosen-Metch, and I have the honor of being the new dean of the Columbia School of General Studies. And I'm pleased to introduce one of our Columbia GS students, Raktim Borbatragohain, who comes from Assam, India. And he is pursuing a bachelor's degree in neuroscience and behavior. He'll be class of 2020. And just to note, this is going to be his second bachelor's degree, as he already has a bachelor's and a master's in engineering and has also worked in a hedge fund, and we're very proud of him. So please come up, Raktim. And he will be introducing Professor Shelley Saltzman.
Good evening, Dean Madison, Dean Rosenmatch, Dean Alonso, respected professors, attendees, and my dear friends. It is a rare privilege for me to have this opportunity to speak at the distinguished Columbia Faculty Awards, and on this occasion to honor Dr. Shelley Saltzman, whom I greatly admire. I met Dr. Saltzman in my first semester as a transfer student from University of Pune in India. Well, technically, I wasn't a transfer student. I already have my degree, but anyways. So I transferred to the School of General Studies, and Dr. Saltzman was my professor for advanced academic writing, a course that helps international students sharpen their English writing skills. My 13 classmates and I came from all over the world, from Korea and China to Croatia and Ukraine. In the first class, Dr. Saltzman had this diverse group spend time getting to know each other, and at the beginning of the next class, there was actually a quiz with questions like, which classmate was in the Korean military, which girl is from Croatia and majoring in drama. Over the semester, we would share stories, discuss ideas, argue, and surprise each other with our opinions. Dr. Saltzman knew we would need to get acquainted first. Although it was a writing class, it wasn't just a writing class. Our writing certainly improved, but Dr. Saltzman put an emphasis on broadening our horizons and challenging our minds through discussions of political and psychological themes. For example, we discussed Stanley Milgram's famous psychological experiment in which unknowing subjects were ordered to give increasingly powerful electric shocks to other people. Most subjects obeyed the orders. It was easier to keep giving shocks than to disobey. We connected this with the story of Adolf Eichmann and his defense that he was just following orders. In the same class session, Dr. Saltzman shared a story about a summer job she had when she, like us, was still in college, conducting in-depth surveys of personnel in certain bank. When she realized that the bank was collecting this data in order to mount a defense for an upcoming discrimination case, and that it would be manipulated to justify discriminating against employees on the basis of race, she did not follow orders. She quit. We were inspired by this personal example. It was clear that what Dr. Saltzman was teaching us was not only how to write clearly and develop our arguments, but how to be better humans and hold ourselves accountable for our actions. On behalf of the 2017 class, I would like to thank Dr. Saltzman for her arduous effort in teaching us and holding our hands and leading us forward. Her office hours went till late, very late. But despite her long commute, she stayed until every student had as much help as they needed. She made sure we improved and learned writing. She's definitely the best teacher I have had in a long time. Thank you.
Hi, I just want to say that I'm honored to be here, and I wanted to say how grateful I am to the Lenz to actually highlight teaching at a research institution. I have had the honor of teaching here many years and seen my students not only survive, but thrive. Many of my former students have really gone on to great acclaim, including the University of Excellence winner last year, 2 GS valedictorians, and a score of Phi Beta Kappa students. So I'm in awe of my students, and I'm reminded of the comment about Ginger Rogers, who did everything Fred Astaire did, but backwards and in heels. My students did this all in their second language, which is quite a coup. So I am thankful to the opportunity to have them, and very thankful to the Lenz to realize how transformative education can be. Thank you.
I'm pleased to introduce Emily Gruber, who is going to speak about Professor Neslihan Shenojak. And Emily is a Columbia College student, class of 2019. She's from Englewood, New Jersey, and she's a history major with a concentration in classics. So Emily, if you could please come up.
Good evening. I'm feeling invigorated because I have just returned from a journey to medieval Europe, the 12th century. Oh, I know. A trip to medieval Europe seems far-flung, daunting, alien. But you may never have traveled with a guide like Professor Shenojak, whose suave teaching renders ancient times pertinent and relatable. In our daily life in medieval Europe class, we gossiped about medieval politicians, the podesta. We applauded the availability of public health care, the curia verarum. We marveled at the sturdy infrastructure of windmills and monasteries. And we were awed by the tales of the saints, who were able not only to perform miracles, but also to perceive others' everyday needs, a special talent, which brings us to the topic of Professor Shenojak. Professor Shenojak is a joyful scholar whose intuitive understanding of her students equips her to be both a leader and a teammate. Professor Shenojak allows her meticulous lectures to meander as she responds attentively to student queries and commentaries. With an endearing constancy, she embraces the minutiae that energized commercialization in medieval Florence, and she remembers who in her classroom is planning a year abroad, who loves the color pink, and who is allergic to nuts. In her course, Daily Life in Medieval Europe, Professor Shenojak revolutionized our understanding of time when she depicted monasteries' scrupulous 8-part canonical schedule and when she responded to a 12 o'clock email at 12:09. Professor Shenojak illuminated rich details about the tripartite field system and rooted our respect for the hourly tasks that define history in the Middle Ages and in 2018. Under her patient tutelage, we broadened our vistas as we traveled to medieval Europe, and we narrowed our focus as we investigated criminal trial methods and compared acquittal statistics. I am grateful to say that throughout this journey, we were not merely her 240 class. We were her students. Professor Senochak, thank you for every supporting smile, for every book taken off the shelf of your towering bookcase, and for every red velvet cupcake. Your intellect has roused us to sharpen our minds, and your kindness has moved us to soften our hearts. I hold these lessons dear, and I am proud to join Columbia University in saluting you today and always. Congratulations.
Thank you so much, Emily, and I will just take 1 minute of your time. First of all, I would like to thank very much to Mr. and Mrs. Lenz for supporting faculty in this meaningful way. It means really a lot. I also would like to thank the whole faculty and staff who have administered this grant. There's a committee for everything in Columbia. I'm sure there was a committee for Lenz Award, so thank you very much for that. And last but not least is the Columbia students I would like to thank too, and they're absolutely amazing, and particularly to my students present here, Emily, Enzo, and Safan, for coming here. It is customary to think that the university professors love the life of intellectual inquiry and the life of the mind, but I always thought that the greatest happiness in life can only come from human relations. And I'm absolutely enjoying my time in Columbia, which allows me really to engage with the young people. And it is their dreams and anxieties and their points of view that teaches me more than any other ancient Greek philosopher. So thank you very much for this award. I'm very lucky to be here. And I would also like to thank my son and my husband who are with me tonight. Okay, thank you.
Bye.
Thank you very much. So I would like to introduce the next student, who is Inzari Kepra. Inzari, I'm not sure where you are, comes from Chicago. She is majoring in economics with a concentration in African American studies, and she is going to introduce the wonderful Joseph Surratt. So where is Inzari?
Good evening. Most likely to Professor Joseph Surratt's surprise, I've been familiar with him and in all of his work since my first semester at Columbia. In a seminar that I took in the fall called Religion on the Move, I encountered Professor Surratt's captivating research on homosexuality in Black churches. It was surreal to find out that this same groundbreaking scholar taught class just before mine in the same room. In between class periods, I often observed Professor Surratt and how he would, like a mentor, welcome my own seminar leader, a first-time instructor, with encouraging words. As a first year, I came to admire Professor Surratt, not only in his scholarship, but also in the way he nurtured other scholars and students. Knowing Professor Surratt is knowing passion for religion, African American studies, and their intersections. When I finally had the chance to take his course, Introduction to African American Studies, last semester, I experienced firsthand how Professor Surratt can transform a large lecture hall into an intimate seminar room. He's the type of professor who addresses students by name, listens intently to their answers, and carefully weaves their responses into the conversation. He also pushes the boundaries of his students, by asking unexpected questions. after the riots in Charlottesville, for example. He pressed our class to delineate tough topics like white supremacy or reverse racism. Seeming effortlessly to navigate these heated discussions, he made sure to create a space that allowed us to examine diverse perspectives. He ensured that each student could leave a potentially divisive conversation, not only with a voice, but also a comprehensive understanding of opposing arguments. In the course, Professor Surratt challenged common perceptions of Blackness by integrating all genders, sexualities, and religions. This inclusivity overflowed from the content in the class into the lecture, inviting guest speakers to illustrate the vast nature of the African American experience, from Black art to sexuality. Professor Surratt himself stepped back into the role of a student. His awareness of the student's experience is evident in all of his classes, assuring us that no one has the one right answer when it comes to the complex issue of race. He gave me the confidence to be a part of the conversation in a lecture hall full of the best and brightest. Beyond our own lecture, I reached out to Professor Surratt last term about comments made in another class that many may perceive as racist. Not only did Professor Surratt listen carefully to my account of the situation, he also took the time to respond thoughtfully with possible next steps, other professors to talk to, other readings to look into. Because it seemed that my distress was tied to my limited exposure to conversations about race, he suggested that I consider concentrating in African American studies. This semester, I look forward to my weekly seminar with Professor Surratt to continue the conversation that has such an immense impact on my academic experience here. I cannot express how grateful I am to have met Professor Surratt and how much he deserves this award. Thank you, Professor Surratt, for guiding me through some of my lowest points at Columbia and motivating me to cultivate and engage with my academic passion. Congratulations.
Nzari has told me I must say a word, so I will follow her lead and follow the student. Thank her, Nzari, for those beautiful remarks. Thank Carl and Iman as well for coming, who were also in the intro. Of course, thank you for the Lenz Fest. It's great to share this night with all of you, with my colleagues in religion as well here this evening. Thank you.
And last, but by no means least, the equally wonderful Mark van der Meerup is the next awardee, the final awardee tonight. I would like to invite Gavin Lance Powell, Columbia College Class of 19, to come to the podium, who will introduce Professor van der Meerup. Gavin is from Flint, Michigan, and is a financial economics major. Gavin.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, for taking the time to be here tonight, in appreciation for some of Columbia's most esteemed faculty members. I must admit, when I was asked to introduce my literature humanities teacher from freshman year, I thought to myself, well, it's never too late to get participation points, right? Like most undergraduates here, Lit Hum was my first introduction to Columbia's acclaimed core curriculum. I remember my initial lack of enthusiasm. I came here to study economics and languages. The core was always a means to an end that allowed me to delve into my true interests. As a minority student, being acutely aware of the criticisms of a course like Lit Hum, I started to build mental barriers in my head to shield myself from the colonial brainwashing I was to face. Thankfully, I was lucky enough to have Professor van der Meerup as my Lit Hum instructor. He could empathize with my grievances with the course while still teaching it in a manner which was incredibly beneficial for my education. From the jump, he didn't try to convince us that these were the greatest books ever written or shy away from the criticisms. Rather, he pointed out the elephants in the room and explained the relevance, not superiority, of the readings selected. I would have never imagined that many of the things I believe or regularly say originated in Plato's Symposium or Cervantes' Don Quixote. Yet, there I was in class learning that integral parts of my character could be partially explained in roughly 2 hours in the Lit Hum section. If the objective was to brainwash me with ideas from Western literature, the man did that years before I came to Columbia's doorsteps. But after taking Lit Hum with Professor Van der Meroep, I feel like I have a lot more agency over what I believe because I now understand where many of my ideas came from. It was my professor's emphasis on context that made my learning experience the most constructive. He started every class by contextualizing the readings for the day. This allowed us as students enhanced perspective on the course material, which ultimately led to more in-depth discussions. I especially recall our discussions about certain sections of the Bible. It was my first time approaching the religious text in a formal academic setting. Personally, having grown up in a Christian household, as a kid, I always thought of the Bible as this mystical book that descended from the sky, never to be challenged or questioned, while in fact, thanks to my professor, I learned how human it was. Shocking, right? Professor Van der Meroep helped us see the Bible as something written by particular people, at particular points in history, in particular genres. It was eye-opening to learn that the New Testament didn't arrive fully formed. 4 Gospels made the cut, but there were others that got rejected. But my beliefs were not weakened by this deconstruction. Rather, I left class with more confidence. I still had questions, of course, but ultimately, I felt like I had a more holistic understanding of the religious text and thus a better understanding of my own belief systems. Professor Van der Meroep was truly invested in giving us the tools to have an informed and intelligent conversation, and even to disagree about these complicated works of literature. Not once did he try to force his interpretation upon us, but to facilitate a learning space where a free flow of viewpoints could intermingle and enlighten everyone in the room. And that does mean everyone present in the room, including Professor Van der Meroep himself. I really appreciate the fact that when a question was asked that he didn't know the answer to, he would continue to think about it, do some reading, talk to his colleagues, and we could expect an email or a comment at the beginning of the next lecture. Thank you, Professor, for reminding me that a good student can keep their integrity while remaining malleable to the influences of a well-intentioned teacher. I can think of no better recipient. Congratulations on this award. I'm sure there are still many more to come.
Well, first I would like to thank Gavin. As you know, he's an economics major. I'm a professor of the ancient history of the Middle East. All the other students were very close to the professors in their fields of interest. We have the most different fields of interest. But when they asked me to select an eloquent student who could speak on my behalf, I thought of Gavin, and I think he did a fantastic job. I would also, of course, like to thank the Lenfists for their support of Columbia faculty. I'd like to thank the administrators actually at Columbia for giving me the opportunity to teach this. And finally, I would actually like to point out one of my guests is a graduate student, Sean O'Neill, who came to Columbia to study early modern intellectual history and who ended up being my head TA for a monster class that I teach on Egyptian history. And I would like to remind all of us that our graduate students are, a very important element for us as faculty members to be able to teach. I would never have been able to teach this massive class if he had not directed the 13 TAs to do so. So thank all of you.
So thank you, everyone. The great universities of the world are truly extraordinary and persistent places. And what goes on in these institutions is, I believe, and I think we all believe, is actually important. We attract extraordinarily bright and talented students to this campus, and we have a tremendous responsibility to do right by these students because they're going to go out into the world and be the world of the future. When we celebrate the great faculty, in a spectacular location like this, as we're doing this evening, it's a truly wonderful occasion, and I just want to congratulate all the winners and well done. Two last things. One is I would just like us to thank one more time the Lenfest, Jerry and Marguerite, who've made all this possible. And it's a gift that will last potentially forever, at this university. Perhaps there'll be people here 100 years from now, 200 years from now doing what we're doing tonight. So thank you, Jerry. I'm looking at the camera. Thank you, Jerry and Marguerite. Excuse me. Finally, I would like to just invite tonight's award winners to come up in this general direction, and we'll take some group photos. And safe home, everyone. Thank you.